We all have games we love, but imagine for a moment there was this game you really like. A game you like so much that it leaves you with an unbearable itch as you anxiously wait for a sequel. Sometimes we do get the sequel we want, and occasionally these sequels even meet our expectations, satisfying our desire for more. However, it is not always such a happy ending. Video games are, after all, a volatile industry. What is a runaway success one moment can quickly lose its spark and fall into obscurity. But we're not here to talk about those. This is a video about the games which went beyond the pale of acceptable standards, the disaster games, releases so bad they should have killed their franchise forever. I'm Radaji, and this is video game franchises that survived disastrous sequels. When Call the Sign released the original Tomb Raider back in 1996, they probably never expected the storm that would follow. With its detailed environments and focus on third-person exploration, Tomb Raider represented a milestone in 3D game design, and would go on to sell over 7 million copies, lifting protagonist Lara Croft into pop cultural superstardom. Tomb Raider would go from strength to strength over the next 3 years, and by 1999, Core had squeezed every last ounce of juice from the series. Tomb Raider 4, The Last Revelation, would take their aging game engine as far as it could feasibly go. After 4 major successes, Core were at the top of their game, and the time was ripe for them to focus all their efforts on the power of the next generation systems. Their failure to do so would ultimately be their undoing. After 4 years of tiresome work, the development team were done with the series. Burnt out and creatively exhausted, they wanted to move on from Tomb Raider. The management at Core, however, were not ready to move on. They still wanted more Tomb Raider games, and so it was to be. Tomb Raider 5 would be coming to the PlayStation. Tomb Raider Chronicles released to mixed reviews as critics saw the reluctance to change with the times as a weakness. Gaming had changed significantly since 1996, but Tomb Raider had not. Chronicles saw a massive drop in sales, but it would take something much worse to kill the giant that was Tomb Raider. The next 3 years at Core would go down as one of the biggest studio implosions of all time. The impact of the generational jump was something they had underestimated greatly. Understaffed, undertimed and undercut, Tomb Raider The Angel of Darkness would be a disaster. Critically panned across the board as a buggy, unfinished, incoherent mess of a game, the failure would damage Core Design beyond repair. With Angel of Darkness destroying all confidence they had in Core Design, publisher Eidos would pass the Tomb Raider IP over to Legacy of Kain developers Crystal Dynamics. Core would never make another hit game, eventually being sold off to Rebellion and rebranded Rebellion Derby. Crystal Dynamics have since returned Tomb Raider to its former glory, with Angel of Darkness being simply remembered as the bad one. A tragic end for Core Design, but one that had to happen to ensure the survival of gaming's most iconic heroine. Released for the PlayStation in 1998, Spyro the Dragon was not only a sleeper hit for the young Insomniac Games, but a technical achievement as its panoramic engine allowed for the dynamic rendering of environments without the use of fog to hide loading. This cutting-edge design would help establish Spyro as a PlayStation platformer that could rival Nintendo's Super Mario 64. Insomniac's eventual trilogy of Spyro games would sell over 11 million copies, etching the series into history as one of the faces of the PlayStation. With Insomniac moving away from Spyro to pursue new pastures, it was up to Universal Interactive to bring the series into the next generation. Released only 2 years after the final PlayStation 1 title, Enter the Dragonfly originally intended to take advantage of the superior PlayStation 2 hardware, with faster loading times and a frame rate that would be locked at 60 frames per second. There was just one problem: Universal were not willing to wait, pushing plans forward to release Enter the Dragonfly in time for the holiday season. Enter the Dragonfly suffered a critical hammering as bugs, glitches, inconsistent frame rates and skeletal content led to the lowest scores in the series, destroying customer confidence. Spyro A Hero's Tale would be a far better game, but the damage had already been done. The Spyro formula had grown stale, and audiences had moved on to more sophisticated action platforms like Naughty Dog's Jak 2 and Insomniac's Ratchet & Clank. The franchise would reboot into The Legend of Spyro. This reboot would be a departure from the explorative platformers of old, instead placing a heavier emphasis on combat. The Legend trilogy would burn out with a whimper, however, and the series appeared to be all but done. But as it would turn out, the name still had value. The choice to market Skylanders as a Spyro game would be a controversial one. The character redesign was heavily disliked by fans, and the game was considered Spyro in name only, a sentiment developers Toys for Bob would share, removing Spyro's name from all future Skylanders installments. With Skylanders being a runaway success, it seems Spyro had exhausted his usefulness, but then something happened. Spyro had gotten old. He was no longer just an over-the-hill video game character from a bygone age. Spyro was officially retro. Activision sensed an opportunity, and they leapt on it, revealing the Spyro Reignited trilogy, a remastering of the PlayStation originals. The game was a critical and commercial success for Activision, sparking a new interest in the Purple Dragon. After years of struggle, Spyro was flying high once more. Driver was a hit for Reflections Interactive when it released on the PlayStation in 1999. Heavily inspired by crime films of the 70s and 80s, Driver was a work of motorized wanton destruction, and yet no matter how fast or recklessly you drove, the pedestrians would always move out of the way, a commitment to tone not often seen in such games. While the off-road mechanics of Driver 2 weren't well realised in execution, they showed the potential of where the series could go once it moved on to better hardware. Unfortunately for Reflections, they would not be the studio to realise the full potential of the 3D open world game. Grand Theft Auto would beat them to it. The goalposts had moved. Building on Driver 2 was no longer good enough. The series needed to carve an identity of its own. The hype for their next game would reach critical mass as Reflections prepared to unleash what was dubbed the GTA killer. There would be no GTA killing. Driver 3 failed to impress. It was a buggy and awkward game not worth the time of players who already had access to Rockstar's far superior efforts. The ambition to create a game that would redefine the open world genre so soon after the breakout of GTA was more than Reflections could handle. Further misery would be piled on the studio when their publisher Atari were accused of offering bribes for favourable reviews. The scandal would become known as Drivergate, a dark chapter in the history of games journalism. Reflections would carry on regardless, and while Parallel Lines would succeed where Driver 3 failed, there was no longer a place in the market for the kind of game Driver wanted to be. The series had well and truly been eclipsed by its Scottish counterpart. Reflections would later be acquired by Ubisoft during what was the publisher's most illustrious period. The move would work wonders for Reflections, as 2011's Driver San Francisco would finally end the run of disappointing sequels. While San Francisco would once again confine the play to the driver's seat, Reflections still wanted the freedom to change cars on the fly. This feature was realised in the form of shifting, a new mechanic that allowed players to possess nearby vehicles. The focus on pure driving would ultimately pay off as San Francisco released the positive reviews, finding a place for itself in a market that had become crowded with open world games. Reflections are still active today, aiding Ubisoft titles such as Far Cry, Watch Dogs and The Crew. Reflections may have no intent to develop a new Driver, but San Francisco's success means the door is always open for the series to continue. While a cliche, it is true that Sonic has never enjoyed a smooth transition to the third dimension like his other 2D compatriots. The Sonic adventure games have strong fan followings but have not held up well under critical scrutiny. Nevertheless, the games demonstrate a passion few can match, something which has helped them endure into the modern day. Sonic Heroes on the other hand did little to deviate from the formula. Besides a strong opening level, the game was a bog-standard affair that demonstrated the cracks in 3D Sonic's foundations. This would only worsen with the diabolical Shadow the Hedgehog. Despite critical failings, the series continued to sell, giving Sega little reason to change their ways. The perfect recipe for a complete disaster. Midway through the development of their next-generation Sonic game, a creatively frustrated Yuji Naka departed from Sega to form his own studio. This loss of leadership would be a blow for Sonic Team, but it was Sega's own actions that would ultimately doom the game. With the Nintendo Wii hardware being unable to match up to that of the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, Sega decided to split resources and develop two different games simultaneously. Understaffed and with time running out, Sonic Team had no choice but to push on with the game's completion, ignoring numerous bug reports from the QA department. Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 would become one of the most infamous bad games ever made. Painful loading times, ugly visuals, broken physics, uninspiring design, and an abundance of bugs would combine to make the game terrible on pretty much every level imaginable. A true AAA Kusoge if there ever was one. Its existence caused other Sonic games to become retroactively worse by association. Such was the harm caused by Sonic 06. Despite the disastrous release, Sega never gave up on the Blue Hedgehog and soldiered on with damaged goods in tow. The years that followed would see the series on a path of continuous experimentation and refinement as Sega looked to find the answer to 3D Sonic. Sonic Unleashed established what we consider modern Sonic to be, a rollercoaster ride of unparalleled speed and action that pushes players to master an arduous but rewarding learning curve. Unleashed was promising but not without setbacks as the game's nighttime levels saw players trade away their speed for the platforming exploits of Sonic the Werehog. The platforming was inoffensive, but the repetitive combat completely killed the pacing. The foundations of a great game were there, but Sonic Unleashed ultimately failed to deliver. Sonic Colors would follow Unleashed by refining its mechanics and introducing the Wisps, a gimmick that surprisingly complemented the core gameplay rather than distract from it. Generations would come next and celebrate Sonic's 20th anniversary by teaming the Hedgehog up with the old version of himself across levels from the entire series. Classic Sonic was a welcome addition as critics and fans alike favoured the back-to-basics 2.5D design over modern efforts. Despite improvements since 2006, Sega were yet to find the answer to 3D Sonic. Christian Whitehead's Sonic Mania would take the series back to its two-dimensional roots and establish classic Sonic as a legitimate alternative. The level of respect shown to fan products by Sega is commendable. For once, Sonic fans have good reason to be optimistic. Devil May Cry 2 was a disappointment, lacking in the subtle touches of Hideki Kamiya's original. Gone was the masterful pleasant frustration, as was the illusion of exploration and discovery that came with DMC's demonic castle. Devil May Cry 2 isn't terrible, but it is underwhelming and surpassed by its sequels in every department. Resident Evil 4 was a blessing and a curse, breathing new life into the series while essentially killing classic Resident Evil. None of the mainline entries were truly terrible, but they were defensive as many longtime fans yearned for a return to classic survival horror. Capcom took fan feedback to heart as Resident Evil 7's shift to first-person horror gave the series a much-needed shake-up. It also gave Capcom the confidence to create the new Resident Evil 2 remake. The remake has quickly proven to be what RE purists have been asking for, and has cemented itself as one of the highlights of 2019. Silent Hill is a strong contender for the biggest gaming tragedy of the past decade. The series had been on a downer ever since the disbandment of Team Silent. This was all set to change in 2014 when Konami released PT onto PlayStation Network. Completion of PT revealed that a new Silent Hill game, titled Silent Hills, was in development. The game was said to be a joint effort between Metal Gear series creator Hideo Kojima and film director Guillermo del Toro. However, internal conflicts saw Hideo Kojima leave Konami, bringing an unfortunate and sudden end to Silent Hills. PT is gone but not forgotten as it goes down as one of the most memorable horror experiences of the last decade. The original Crash Bandicoot trilogy was one of the highlights of the PlayStation, selling over 17 million copies and making the character an industry icon. Following the departure of creators Naughty Dog, the series would fall on hard times, with the Wrath of Cortex being nothing more than a weak imitation of the originals. Crash's woes would only be worsened as Naughty Dog's own Jack and Daxter made it look completely outdated. Trinsanity would open the series up to explorative platforming, but it was too little too late. Everything it did had already been done better. With Crash of the Titans also failing to impress, the series fell to the wayside. To mark the 20th anniversary of the series, Activision would release the remastered Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy. The game would be a major success and bring the series back into the public conscious. Crash is back, and with the announcement of a Crash Team Racing remaster, he is seemingly as strong as ever. Video games are a cutthroat industry where only the successful survive, as almost every major release sees its franchise walk the line between life and death. Many have been lost along the way and many more will follow, but for now let us take solace in those which have defied death and come back as strong as ever. Thanks for watching. If you know of any games that have survived similar ordeals, please feel free to share them in the comments. Farewell for now.